Good morning. I'm delighted to have the opportunities to speak to you on such an important matter, and I really appreciate your attendance in this workshop. I must thank, of course, Fondazione IFEL in the person of Professor Giuseppe Ferrari for inviting me for this workshop, and at the same time allow me to visit again the beautiful city of Rome. I must finally present my excuses for not speaking in Italian. Actually, I've learned Italian for 1 year, but it was useless, and so I'll have to engage you in English. So I'll start with the beginning. The use of renewable energy, as is widely known, has several advantages. Environmental advantages, economic advantages, also political advantages. On the downside, electricity generated through renewable sources is frequently more expensive than electricity generated through conventional sources. All these advantages translate into public interests which are in Portugal pursued mainly by central government. According to the subsidiarity principle, decisions should be taken at a level as closest as possible to the citizens, which would mean, of course, the local level. But decisions in these matters seem to be more effective if taken at upper levels of decision. So the conclusion as to this is that in Portugal, local public authorities do not play a big role in fostering the construction or the use of renewable energies. The main role is played by the Portuguese government, by private companies and citizens. In fact, the Portuguese government fosters the construction or installation by private companies of hydroelectrical dams, wind turbines, and photovoltaic and biomass facilities, all intended to produce electrical power. Regarding private citizens, the government subsidizes the use of solar hot water panels and fireplaces with heat recovery. Since 2007 and 2011, so-called micro-production and mini-production of electricity by renewable power sources is also subsidized via guaranteed feed-in tariffs. So it is easily understandable, after what I've said, that most of the investment in renewable energy sources comes from private companies, citizens, and the Portuguese government. In fact, that reflects the circumstance that Portugal is a highly centralized country. Less than 20% of all public expenses are made by the local and regional levels of government. So the central government expenses are more than 80% of the total. However, taking into account that 70 to 80% of carbon emissions comes from urban areas, the involvement of local authorities can, of course, be useful, and that regarding various areas of activity. And so local authorities can introduce energy-saving programs and actions in public buildings, can introduce measures to reduce energy in public transport and street lighting. Also, they have an important role concerning strategic decisions in public, essentially urban development. And they could, for example, also set some energy performance standards in new buildings. And so local authorities could have an important role regarding renewable energy. In fact, we've talked of several matters here, and we can make a distinction in this list between energy efficiency measures and renewable energy measures. And in fact, when we're talking about local authorities, these renewable energy measures are essentially of two types. Local authorities can promote the private use of renewable energy through information, regulation, or subsidies, and local authorities can put up renewable energy sources for their own use. And as we will see, these last measures are the ones which are preferred by Portuguese local authorities. Local authorities in Portugal, especially those involved in the Covenant of Mayors, are essentially focused in promoting an increase in the efficient use of energy. That is, most of the measures that are adopted and are contained in sustainable energy action plans enacted by Portuguese municipalities are measures which regard energy efficiency and not renewable energy. So far, 53 Portuguese municipalities submitted a sustainable energy action plan, and looking at those plans, very few detailed the origin of the financial funds needed to implement the various environmental actions. Anyway, analyzing those plans that do detail the origin of the financial funds, one can observe that 70 to 75% of the money comes from private sources, and only about 25% is of public origin. Of these, between 13 to 16% will come from central government, 7 to 10% will come from the municipality itself, and only 3 to 4% from European funds. And in fact, looking at the SWOT analysis contained in several sustainable action plans, two of the weaknesses which are frequently referred to are general funding difficulties and the fact that the plan's execution is highly dependent on private funds. Anyway, as has been said, the great majority of the proposed measures concern the enhancement of energy efficiency and not the development of renewable energy. When renewable energy sources are involved, they have to do with the provision of energy to municipal buildings, including in these municipal buildings public housing, mainly by taking advantage of rooftops to install solar hot water panels or photovoltaic panels. Typically, local authorities also commit to help companies and citizens by spreading information on the use of renewable energies and on the various government support programs available. However, regulatory or subsidizing measures are usually not involved. That is, normally local Portuguese authorities do not subsidize the installation of renewable energy equipments and do not regulate that installation. Concerning subsidies, I believe it is now apparent why they do not exist. The financial difficulties of the Portuguese municipalities make it very hard or impossible to grant money gratuitously. Rather, Portuguese authorities prefer to invest in renewable energies for their own consumption, benefiting from government subsidies, that is, money grants, tax exemptions, feed-in tariffs, that make the operation profitable both from the environmental and the economical point of view. Regarding the lack of regulatory measures on renewable energy, for example, the imposition of the incorporation of renewable energy equipment in new buildings, the fact is that the government has, since 2006, imposed the nationwide use of solar panels in new buildings. So there isn't any regulatory margin here for municipal authorities. It could, however, be discussed whether other kinds of regulatory measures could be adopted by local authorities and make sense, let's say, from the subsidiarity principle point of view. The great advantage of these regulatory measures is that they are virtually for free from the municipality point of view. It doesn't have to spend any money of it. All the costs is borne by the private sector. However, there are in Portugal problems of jurisdiction that would have to be solved. And since the theme of this intervention is local finance, we will proceed to the question of how Portuguese municipalities finance their renewable energy measures. Of course, and first of all, local authorities have access to European funds, either those funds which are managed at a national level, and you can think here of several funds, Jessica, European Regional Development Fund, Interreg, and funds which are managed centrally by the European Commission, Urbact, IEE, ELENA, etc. Although most Portuguese municipalities that made a sustainable energy action plan are clearly aware of these funding opportunities, they seem to think that European funds will cover only 3 to 4% of the planned expenses. So it's important, but it's not that important. Secondly, Portuguese authorities, local authorities, have access to several national funds. And so there is the Portuguese Carbon Fund, which is managed by the Portuguese Environment Agency and which supports emission reduction projects undertaken in Portugal. There's an energy efficiency fund which is managed by the Portuguese government and which grants financial support measures for, among other, the purchase of equipment with better energy performance or equipment which offer a more rational use of energy, such as heat exchangers and solar thermal collectors. Then there's the Innovation Support Fund, which supports projects in the areas of renewable energy and energy efficiency, promoting innovation, technological development, and the strengthening of domestic business. Finally, and most important, the central government enacted some schemes of micro-production and mini-production. Micro-production would go up to an installed capacity of 3.68 kilowatt, and mini-production up to an installed capacity of 250 kilowatt. And these schemes allow the production of renewable energy by private citizens, by companies, and by local authorities, and it's sold to the grid at a subsidized rate. I didn't mention here several funds which exist also at the national and at the European level, but which are destined essentially to finance measures of energy efficiency. So I just selected those which can be applied to renewable energy measures. As I already mentioned, some action plans are counting that government financing could go up to 16% of those action plans' total expenses. Thirdly, and finally, Portuguese local authorities are counting on other financial means. And namely, they are counting on energy service companies. That is, companies, private companies, that assume the investment cost of energy efficiency measures or renewable energy investments and receive afterwards a portion of the savings generated. They will fund the investment and receive afterwards a part of the profit, let's say. They're also thinking about investment funds with a revolving nature, that is, financial schemes that may include loans or outright grants, and which invest in profitable projects with a short turnaround time and allowing for the refinancing of the fund, which in turn will fund new projects. And of course, there are the classical funding means of leasing, so a form of bank financing, which is particularly suitable for initiatives with substantial investments in equipment, and essentially, in this case, renewable energy equipment, and classic bank loans. Another important funding mean is to local authorities is the fact that the owners of wind farms pay annually a special tax for which Portuguese local authorities received in 2011 23 million euros. So it remains to be seen whether the recourse to these various funding schemes will allow Portuguese municipalities to execute all the sustainable energy action plans projected measures, taking into account the difficult situation of the country, which, as you probably know, is under a Troika action program. It's probably wiser not to engage in operations which are economically doubtful or that entail an increase in municipal liabilities. There is a particularly well done sustainable energy action plan, that of a Portuguese municipality called Agda, which at the beginning classifies various possible measures, asking if they are environmentally and economically sound. Only those measures that comply with both criteria were selected to be part of the projected measures. And of course, one of the advantages of selecting economically sound measures is that it increases the chances of finding an investor, a public or namely private investor, willing to fund the initiative. Taking again the example of this Portuguese municipality, Agda, it forecasts an investment of 3.3 million euros per year. However, and apparently thanks to external financing, only 1.2 million euros, approximately a third, will have to be disbursed directly by the municipality, by private companies, and by the citizens. Of the total 3.3 million euros invested, 530,000 euros will go into renewable energies, that is approximately 15%. This will go essentially into installing photovoltaic panels and solar thermal panels on municipal buildings. And according to Agda's action plan, 80% of that investment will be covered by external financing. However, if one looks closely, it emerges that only 20% of the investment will be covered by public incentives, and 60% will be hedged by banking loans, which of course will have to be repaid. Apparently, Agadar's municipal authority didn't think that ESCO's financing was possible in this area. Anyhow, 80% of the cost will have to be covered by internal municipal funds or by banking loans to be repaid later by municipal funds. And this is possible because, according to the action plan's calculation, the investment on renewables would imply a net final actual value of 1 million euros. That is, it would be at the end profitable. And so that's the reason why a substantial part of the investment is to be funded by private banks in this case. And so I would finalize saying that for Portuguese municipalities nowadays, the great challenge is always to find those renewable energy investments which are economically sound, besides being environmentally sound, and that, of course, permits it to find private funding besides the public funding which is available and which will allow it to finalize its action plan. Thank you for your attention and your patience.